So I just released a big update to Winhance, the Windows Enhancement utility, and it's got a ton of new features that makes it much better than it was before. In this video, I'm going to give you a demo of the application to show you how you should be using it, so you can also enhance your Windows 10 or Windows 11 experience. Let's get started. So first off, you can download Winhance or Winhance, depending on how you want to pronounce it, from the official website, which is winhance.net. And the application is completely free and open source, with all of the code available on the Winhance GitHub page. So I'm going to download it by clicking on the Download Winhance button, which will download the Winhance installer. So I'm going to run the Winhance installer to start the installation. I'll install it for all users, select yes on the user account control prompt, and then proceed with the installation. Now you do have two options. You can either perform a regular installation, or you can do a portable installation. So for those of you who want a portable version of Winhance, you still have to download the installer and then extract the portable version from inside of the installer. But I'm going to perform a regular installation and I'll create shortcuts as well. Just click on next and install, and that's then going to install Winhance and the .NET 9 runtime dependency that Winhance has. And then we can go ahead and launch Winhance. You can just click yes to accept the user account control prompt, because the app has to run as an administrator, and then it'll start launching the application. Now this first startup process can take quite a while depending on the speed of your computer, so you'll just have to be patient and wait for it to complete. So when you launch Winhance for the very first time, you'll see this message that says Winhance has created backups to protect your system. So what happened was system restore was enabled and a restore point was created for you automatically. And then also registry backups were created, and you can find them in the location listed here. And the system restore point can be used from system restore, and it's named Winhance initial restore point. So this is just a safety net in case you need it. But there are some important notes to this, and that is that system restore will only restore system settings and registry changes. It will not restore any apps that you removed with Winhance. You can reinstall the apps using the Microsoft Store or Winhance itself, and then also registry backups are created only once on first launch. And if you don't want to create system restore points in the future, you can check this box, which is checked by default, and then just click on OK. So this is the Winhance main window. And just before we get into the actual demo, let me just show you what I'm working with here in terms of the Windows version. So if I just go to System, I can show you that I'm doing a demo of this on actual hardware. This isn't a virtual machine or anything. This is a real computer. And this is Windows 11 Pro version 25H2, and that is the build number that I'm running at the moment. Now, Winhance does also work on Windows 10. You can use it on Windows 10. It's developed to work on Windows 11 and Windows 10. And I'll mention the important things between Windows 10 and Windows 11 as we go along in this demo. Now to get started with the actual demo, Winhance has a light theme and a dark theme. By default, it's going to use what you have as your system theme. So if Windows was set to light mode, it's going to start up in light mode, like you can see here. But if you want to toggle the theme, you can just click on the theme toggle button here, and that's going to toggle between light mode and dark mode. For this tutorial, I'm going to use dark mode because that's just what I prefer, but feel free to use what you prefer. Now I'm going to start off this demo by doing some things manually in Winhance, showing you the UI and how the different features work. And after that, I'm going to move on to some more automated stuff, which is going to involve the Winhance config files. So you can apply your own settings or recommended settings, and then also how you can automate Windows installs with your Winhance settings. So to start with the UI here, you've basically got three main sections. You've got the software and app screen. You've got the optimize screen, which contains settings related to Windows optimization, which isn't necessarily visual changes that you can see on the computer. And then you've got the customize screen, and this is settings that you can customize your Windows appearance and behavior. And these settings are more visual type of settings. So when you toggle these, you'll actually see something visually change in Windows. Now moving on, we've got a new navigation button called Advanced Tools. And if I click on that, we've got two new options, which is WIMUtil, which is the Windows Installation Media Utility. And you have the option of creating an autounattend.xml file with your Winhance settings. But we'll get to these two later on in the demo. And then we've got the More button where you can see the version, you can check for updates, you can open the Winhance logs folder, scripts folder, or you can close Winhance. But let's start from the top and go through the software and apps section. So you've basically got two different sections here. You've got the Windows apps and features, which contains the normal Windows apps, and then the Windows capabilities, which are basically like legacy Windows apps. And then you've got Windows optional features. Then on the other tab, which is external software, you've got software from external providers that you can install on the system. And you've also got status indicators telling you whether the app is installed on your system or not. So this is a fresh Windows install I'm doing this on. That's why I don't really have anything installed except OBS Studio, which I'm using to record this video. So let's go back to the Windows apps and features section. And what most of you will probably use this for is to remove Windows apps or remove Windows items that you don't want. So to remove an item, you can just select it and then you can remove it. Now you also have the option to install it here in case you want to install something that you might not want to have removed. And something very important that you need to know is that not all of these items can be reinstalled. Items with this red sync icon cannot be reinstalled, and that's for various reasons. For example, Skype is retired, you can't reinstall it, but obviously it's still contained on some Windows images, like Windows 10 and older versions of Windows 11. So I'm going to go ahead and uninstall most of these applications. I'm going to select all of them. So this is going to select all of the Windows apps, all of the Windows capabilities and optional features. And then I'm just going to deselect those that I want to keep on the system. So for me, that's going to be the calculator, notepad, and the snipping tool, and also the terminal. For the Windows capabilities, I'm going to leave OpenSSH client selected because I use that, and maybe also the Windows Media Player. And for the Windows optional features, I'm just going to deselect all of these and just remove or disable recall. So you can see that it is disabled at the moment, but what Winhance does is it creates removal scripts that'll run every time that you start up your computer. So if recall is ever enabled by a Windows update, for example, or for a matter of fact, any of these applications gets reinstalled via a Windows update, the schedule task will run the removal script, which is just automatically going to uninstall that application again. So for that reason, it's very important that if you do want to reinstall some items, you have to do it via Winhance, because Winhance will actually update these scripts and the scheduled tasks so that the items aren't removed again when you restart your computer and it boots up the next time. So before I run this removal, I'm just going to open the Start menu, and you can see all of the items that's installed in Windows here. This is basically the stock Windows 11 experience, like I said before. And after we remove these items, it's going to be much cleaner. And you can see it also removes Microsoft Edge and OneDrive. So let's go ahead and run this removal. I'm going to click on Remove Selected Items. You'll be prompted to confirm this removal, so you can have a look at the items you selected again to make sure that you're absolutely sure you want to remove them. I'm absolutely sure, so I'm just going to click on Yes, and that's going to start the removal of the Windows apps. And here you can see the status of everything that's happening. So in this version of Winhance, which is version 25.11.03, I've improved the script dramatically. The Edge uninstallation script has been completely reworked, and it doesn't remove the Edge Web View component. So if you have applications that require Edge Web View 2, that'll still work. And also I added a open web search redirect so that for items that you need to open which requires Microsoft Edge, you won't get an error saying that it can't open the link. It'll just open the link in your default browser. But I will demo that a bit later on in this video once we've actually installed a browser, because right now we don't have one because I just removed Edge, and I'm going to be installing one using the external software section in Winhance. So we're just going to wait for the Windows app removal to complete, and as you can see, it's done. You can see the status indicators for all of these have also been updated. And if you want to do a manual refresh, you have a refresh button up here that when you click that, it's going to refresh the installation status. And you'll then have an accurate status of what's installed on the system. In our case, it's calculator, notepad, snipping tool, and terminal. And then we also kept the media player and OpenSSH client. So if I open the Start menu and we have a look at it, you can see that we still have LinkedIn here. That is not an app that's installed in Windows. And we're going to clean the start menu up when we get to the customize section in Winhance. But if I go to all apps, you can see that we only have the calculator, notepad, the snipping tool, and terminal installed from the apps that we selected. Now before we move on to the external software, if you click on the help button, you're going to see the Winhance status for the scheduled tasks and removal scripts that are currently present on your system. So you can see all three of these icons are colored or lit up, and this one represents the bloat removal script, this one represents the edge removal script, and this one represents the OneDrive removal script. So let's say, for example, you don't want the scheduled tasks and scripts to be saved on your computer and to run every time you start up Windows. Then you can just open the Windows Apps Help and you can click on these items. It's going to prompt you if you want to remove that specific script and scheduled task. You can then click on yes, and it's going to remove it. As you can see, the bloat removal script has now been deleted. Now you can do the same with Microsoft Edge and OneDrive. I'm not going to do that in this video now because I want to demonstrate the automatic edge removal later on again. But like I said, if you want to delete the scripts and scheduled tasks, then you can do so here. Now you also have a search bar if you want to search for something. Let's take calc, for example, then you can see the calculator item. Now let's move on to the external software section. So in the external software section, you've basically got the exact same UI where you can install selected items, uninstall selected items, you can refresh the view, and then you also have some basic help content there with the option to search for items. You've also got the same checkboxes where you can select all items, select all the installed items, which is currently just OBS Studio, and then select all not installed. And then you've got different categories here, like you've got browsers, compression, customization utilities. You've got a whole bunch of different categories that you can go through. And this is basically apps that you need on a fresh install of Windows. And this is also my vision for when I started creating Winhance. My background is in IT support, where I supported home users and small office and business users. And a lot of my days involved installing Windows on laptops, on new computers, doing the same tasks over and over and over again. And back then, if I had a tool like Winhance, it would have saved me so much time setting up the new computers and just eliminating those repetitive tasks that take up a lot of time. But moving on, next to each of the items in the external software section, you've got a link which will open your browser to the web page of the specific item. Now we don't currently have a browser installed right now because I removed Microsoft Edge. So I'm going to select the Brave browser and then click on install selected items, click yes on the confirmation. And that's then going to go ahead and download and install Brave via Widgets. So we can at least go online and use a browser and surf the internet. Now the output that you see down here is actually the actual Widgets output in PowerShell. This is supposed to be some sort of loading indicator or installation indicator, which I don't think is that great, but that's what you're seeing here. It is Widgets busy working and installing the item. So there you can see Brave was successfully installed and we've got it here on the desktop. I'm just going to open it and set it as the default browser and just skip all of this so we've got a browser open. So I'm just going to close it, and to demonstrate to you, if you want to open one of these links, let's take the Firefox link for example. If I click on this, it's going to open the default browser and take you to the web page of that specific item in the external software section, so you can get more info about it. You can check whether it's a paid item, whether it's a free item, what exactly it does, and you can decide if you want to install it or not. So all of these items are predefined in Winhance, but the majority of them are available on Widgets, and that is kind of the prerequisite that I have for adding them to this section. I know you get other package managers as well and direct download links, and I have added some of that functionality, but mainly the package has to be available on Widgets for me to incorporate it into Winhance. And if you want any package incorporated, you can go to the Winhance GitHub page and you can create an issue, mark it as a feature request, and give me some recommendations for software that I can add to Winhance. Just make sure it's not here already. You can simply do that by doing a search for it, to see if it doesn't already exist. So now that we have a default browser installed and we don't have Microsoft Edge installed on the system at all, I want to show you something. If you open the start menu on Windows 10 or Windows 11 and you do a search for something, let's say VLC, by default you're going to get these results for the web as well. So when you click this, it's going to try and open Microsoft Edge to take you to that web page. But since we uninstalled Microsoft Edge, it's not going to be able to do that. But in the updated Edge removal script, there's actually a redirect that redirects it to your default browser. So if I go ahead and click on this item here, it's going to open it in Brave, and you won't see a message that says something like there's no application to open this Microsoft Edge link or whatever. And that work is based on Open Web Search 2023, which redirects Microsoft Edge URLs to your default browser, which was created by Avio. And I just thought I'd give him a quick shout out. I did change the code so it works specifically with the Winhance Edge removal script, but essentially this is where it came from. And if you want to have a look at the original script, you can do so on GitHub. So this is one way that you can delete the scheduled tasks and scripts, but Winhance also does it automatically when you select an item in Winhance and reinstall it via Winhance. So as an example, I'm going to reinstall OneDrive using Winhance. So I'll select that, click on Install Selected Items, click Yes on the confirmation so it can start downloading and installing OneDrive. And once it's finished, you'll see that the OneDrive scheduled task and script will be deleted automatically, and the OneDrive icon in the Windows Apps Help content is going to be grayed out. That indicates that the tasks and scripts have been deleted. So you can see OneDrive is now installed. If I click on the Help content, the OneDrive icon is now grayed out, indicating that it's not being actively removed via the schedule task and script anymore because those have been removed from the system. So at the moment, it's only Microsoft Edge that'll be removed if it's installed via Windows Update or some other way, and we restart the computer, Edge is going to be uninstalled automatically. Now, moving on to the Optimize section. If you click on the nav button, it's going to show you a loading indicator because there's a lot of registry queries and command queries to check the actual system state of your computer so it can populate the Winhance UI with the correct states. Now, each setting has a settings card with the name of the setting, and then you also get a description so you can see what the setting does. If you hover over a control with your mouse, you can see the changes it's going to make to your computer. So in this case, it's going to be a registry change that's going to affect those two values. The same goes for toggles. If you hover over the toggle, you'll see a tooltip that's going to show you what exactly it's going to change on your system. Now, I've added a lot of settings to Winhance, and it's way too many settings to go through each and every setting individually in this video. I am going to do a quick rundown of the different features that you get and the subgroups inside of those features. And I'll also change some of these settings so you can see how Winhance is supposed to be used, although that should be pretty obvious. So let's just start with this first setting here. We've got user account control level. If you click on the drop down, you'll have the different options. I'm just going to set this to never notify. For the toggles, you just click on the toggle and it's going to enable it. And very important, if a setting did not take effect on your computer, it's going to revert the control in the UI. So if it says it's on, and you can also verify it by looking at the tooltip. You can see that the current value is 1. If I click on this and we hover over it again, the tooltip has now changed to not set because these keys are policies keys, which are group policies. And in that case, it deletes the key. It doesn't set a value. But if I were to look at another setting, which does not use the group policy editor, you can see right now the current value is set to 1. And if I toggle it off, the current value is now set to 0. So you can see exactly what's happening when you toggle one of these settings. Now, first off, we've got the privacy and security feature, and we've got some subgroups inside of it, which is the security subgroup. Then we've got a content delivery and advertising section, and you've got a master control for all of these items in the content delivery and advertising section. So right now you can see it's set to custom, where some of these items are on and the others are off. Now, if I go and click on the drop down and set it to deny, it's just going to turn all of those settings off. The same goes for if I click on allow it'll turn all of them on. But I'm going to click on deny to turn all of it off, because why do we want ads? You know? The next section here is the lock screen section. So you can enable or disable the lock screen. And then you also have some settings that are dependent on the lock screen. So if the lock screen is enabled, then you can also toggle these settings. But if the lock screen is disabled, then those settings will be disabled as well. And the toggles that you have there, it doesn't matter whether it's on or off, because the lock screen isn't visible. But if you wanted to change those values, then you just toggle on the parent setting, disable all of those, and then also disable the lock screen. Next, we've got the general section, and this is still inside of the privacy and security feature. As you can see, you've got a quick nav bar up here where you can jump to these settings, because there's really a lot of settings inside of Winhance now. And if you don't want to scroll all the way down to sound, you can just click on sound and you'll be taken to the sound feature. But let's go back to privacy and security, and let's go to the general section. Now, from here, if I open the Windows settings, and I just drag this over to the right here, if we navigate over to the privacy and security section and we click on general, then you're basically going to see the same settings that you see in Winhance. So if I were to toggle all of these settings on and go back to privacy and security and go into the general section again, you'll see all of these items have been toggled. So if we go back to privacy and security, you can see you've got the speech section, and that's the same in Winhance. Then you've got inking and typing, you've got diagnostic data, and then you've got search permissions. So where possible, I just did it this way, so it's a bit more familiar for users, as most of you are already familiar with the Windows settings and the Windows UI, and then it's also easier for you to see what a setting does. But for some of these settings, like the ones we did previously, most of these aren't found in Windows, so they have their own section in Winhance, but where possible, I did group them the same way Windows groups them. Now, if we move on to the power section, Winhance now gives you a lot of control over your power settings in Windows. First off, you can select your power plan, and this also populates with any custom power plans that you might have on your system. And then you've got all of the normal advanced power settings that you might have in Windows, along with some ones that are not available by default. And this is in the processor power management section. And these are also locked by default, because most users should not go and change these settings, but they have been made available for those who want to change them and who knows what they're doing. Now, if I just go back to the top here and we go to the power plan selection, currently it's set to balanced, which is the default in Windows. Now, if I click on this drop down here, you're going to see the plans that are present on the system, which is by default on most computers, balanced, high performance, and then power saver. And then you can import and activate the ultimate performance plan. And then I've also added a custom Winhance power plan, which is based on the ultimate performance power plan, but it just has some other recommended values that are not set by default in the ultimate performance power plan. So for this demo, I'm going to click on the Winhance power plan to select it. It's then going to activate that power plan on the system and automatically apply all of the recommended settings for that plan. Now, if I click on this drop down again, you'll notice that there is a trash can icon next to some of these power plans, and you can actually delete the plans that you don't want on your system. Now, most users are not going to do this. There are some power users who only want to have one power plan on their computer, and this is for those people. So if I do a search for control and we open the control panel and we go to the power options, you can see that we currently have these plans here. And this is the same thing that Winhance shows you. Now, if I go ahead and click on the trash can icon, I'm going to delete the balanced power plan. I'm going to delete the high performance power plan, and I'm going to delete the power saver plan. So right now I only have the Winhance power plan present on the system. And if we go back to all control panel items and power options, then we only have the one power plan. Now, this isn't destructive, because if you want to restore these plans, let's say the balanced plan, for example, you can just click on it. It's going to restore the power plan and its settings for that plan. And just the way Windows works, if you select either the balanced, high performance, or power saver, it's actually going to restore all three of them, because it's a default scheme, and then you can go ahead and use them again. I can show you if we go back to the power options, all of those plans have been restored and you can use them. Now, I'm just going to put it back on the Winhance power plan because that's what I want to use. But now you know if you want to delete these plans, you can do that inside of the Winhance UI now. In the power feature, you'll only see the controls that are applicable to your system. So for example, I'm using this on a desktop, which doesn't have a UPS or a battery. So I'm only seeing one set of controls here, which is the AC power controls when it's plugged in, basically. If you're on a laptop or Winhance has detected that the device has a battery, then you'll see two sets of controls. You'll see a set of controls for AC power for when it's plugged in, and you'll see a set of controls for DC power when it's on battery. And I'll show you an example of that on screen now, just so you can see what I mean. And you can then toggle these settings individually, just like you're able to do in Windows. You can also change the advanced settings. So if you want to turn off your display in 15 minutes, it's going to do that. And if we just navigate back to control panel and the power options, and we look at the plan settings, it'll now turn off the display in 15 minutes. So I kind of implemented an entire power config feature inside of the power feature in Winhance. It was really a lot of hard work, but in the end, I think it came out pretty well. So now you can go through and set all of your desired power settings in Winhance, and you don't have to use the Windows UI if you don't want to. Because if you didn't know, Windows is planning on retiring the control panel, so you might not have access to this power feature in future versions of Windows. It's being replaced by the settings power options, and you don't really have all of the control over everything that you had in the old control panel settings. And that is why I think this is quite valuable to have inside of Winhance. Now, just to get back to the settings that are locked, in Winhance, these settings are set according to the power plan that you select. So the default settings for these specific settings won't break your computer or anything. These are safe values. But if you go and change some of these settings to values that it shouldn't be at, especially these controls that use the numeric values, it can cause system instability and result in more heat generation and that type of thing. So you really need to use caution when you change these settings, and that's why they're locked by default. But you can unlock them. If you click on any of these, you'll see the advanced power setting warning, and that this setting isn't normally exposed in the Windows power options, but you can change the setting. Windows does allow it. It's just normally through the command line or PowerShell that you have to do it. This basically just gives you a user interface where you can do it. But if you don't know the values that you need to set, then it's best to just leave this on the default that it's at. So you will get this warning. If you want to unlock the setting, you can click on unlock and it's going to unlock all of those settings. And then as an example, let's just change one of these settings to 10%. So the CPU core parking maximum cores. And if I go back to the control panel into power options, and we change the Winhance plan settings, go to advanced power settings. If we go to the processor power management group and we look at the max core settings, you can see it's set to 10%, the same way that Winhance says. So if we close all of that, I'm just gonna set it back to 100% because this is for best performance. And most of these settings do have a decent description as well, so you can see what it does and if you even need to fiddle around with it or not. And Microsoft has also provided extensive documentation on these items, and you can read up on Microsoft's documentation if you want to know what some of the other values are that you can set this to. So continuing on in this feature, you've got the other advanced setting groups like multimedia settings, and then I've also added a start menu section where you can decide if you want to show the lock option or the sleep option. So that's if you click on the start menu and then on the power button, you'll see the lock or sleep option here. I'm just going to explicitly toggle these settings so they do show up. So you can see now the lock and sleep options are showing in the start menu, but if I toggle them off, they will now be gone and it's only the shutdown and restart that you can see. Now next we can move on to the gaming and performance section. You can toggle the game mode in Windows on and off. You can disable the mouse acceleration, and you've got a bunch of settings related to gaming and speeding up the performance of your computer. It's got different categories like processor, we've got graphics, network, we've got Xbox related stuff, and then we've got system services. So these services are related to the services.msc in Windows, which are all of these services that you see here. And I just added some services that in most cases are safe to either set to disabled or manual. And they've also got complete descriptions, so you can see if you should set it to manual or disabled. In my experience with the system services, it's best to set them to manual, because this way it's going to only use it when it's needed. For this specific setting, like sysmain, it is recommended that you disable it, but most of these other settings are set to manual, because that way it'll only start up if it's really needed. And there's a big thing in the computer industry or the performance industry. If you go to Task Manager and you look at performance and you look at process count, you want to get that down as low as possible. And honestly, people have tested this. Lower process count does not actually make a difference in the performance of your computer. What does make a difference is the background apps that might be running in the background that you're not using. Those can take up significant resources, but these processes, like the normal Windows services, aren't really going to give you a massive performance increase if you set them to disabled. And in my experience, in most cases, if you disable most of these services, somewhere down the line, you're going to sit down and troubleshoot something that's not working. And that's just because a simple service couldn't start when it was needed. Take, for example, the print spooler service. If you're going to set that to disabled, you won't be able to print, and you're not going to be able to figure out why you can't print, because there's no obvious error that's telling you that you need to enable the service. So for that reason, I recommend just setting most of these to manual if you really want to change the service startup types. And you can also see for settings that require a restart for the changes to take effect, you will get a ribbon on the settings card that tells you that this will only be affected after a restart. So there's a few services here that you can go through and decide what you want to have done with them, whether you want to leave them as is, set them on manual. You can see some of these are set to manual already by Windows, but if you want to explicitly set them to disabled, that's your choice. It's your computer. You can do it the way you want to do it. Winhance just provides you a UI for some of these services that you can set to disabled. Next, we've got some scheduled tasks, and a lot of these scheduled tasks you can actually disable. So it's not going to delete the scheduled task from the system at all. It's just going to disable it. And if you want to enable it, you can just come back and enable it if it's really needed. But you do have clear descriptions of what these do. So for example, these tasks, you can disable them to reduce telemetry. So if you just click on them to disable them, it's going to disable that task. And you can see a lot of this is related to privacy and telemetry and network activity and just tasks that don't really need to start up for most people. But you can download Winhance and go through this list on your own time and decide which scheduled tasks you want to have run at startup and which ones you want to have disabled. The next group we have here is the visual effects group. Now this visual effects group here is if you go to the system properties and then advanced and you click on performance and you get to settings. This is the visual effects in Windows. And as you can see, it's set to let Windows choose what's best for my computer, which is what Winhance also says. And then you've got all of these items here and you can see all of them are on except save taskbar thumbnail previews and showed shadows under mouse pointer. Those two are off inside of Winhance as well. And all of the others are on. Now, disabling some of these visual effects does actually give you a performance increase, or it might feel like a performance increase because things are just snappier and happen faster inside of Windows. But you can do some research on those visual effects as well if you're really into optimizing for performance. We're going to get to a preset later on in the video once we get through all of these features. And then I'll show you what I recommend those settings be set to. Then lastly, we've got an accessibility group. And this is just basically some hotkeys that can interfere with you while you're playing games. That's why it's set in the gaming and performance category. It's not going to give you a performance increase by disabling it. It's just going to prevent unnecessary pop-ups and you accidentally pressing buttons while playing games and then accidentally minimizing the game or whatever. So that's why those are there in the gaming and performance section. So now we're in the update section. And the first thing you'll notice here is a Windows Update policy setting. Now, if you click on the drop down here, you're going to have 4 choices. So you'll have normal, which is the Windows default. You'll have security updates only. And then you'll have paused for a very long time, which you can unpause in settings. And then you've got completely disabled, which is not recommended, you know, but it is there if you want to use it. And you can see currently for me, it's set to paused for a long time. And that's just because I paused the settings in Windows Update because I don't want to have Windows Update interfere while I'm recording this video. But for example, if we set this to disabled, it's going to disable the Windows updates. And this disabled setting is based on work by Chris Titus. He actually made a video about the state of Windows updates and how it's actually breaking more things than fixing things or providing security for users. So he actually made a script that completely disables the Windows updates. And that is also what this specific setting does inside of Winhance. So when you set it to disabled, it's going to obviously completely disable the Windows updates, but it's also going to delete any of the Windows updates that have been downloaded to your system. So this setting can take a while to apply to your system. But if we navigate to settings and Windows update, you're going to see no Windows updates. But like I said, this isn't really recommended. Like honestly, what I recommend for most people is the security updates, because it's not going to install the updates as soon as they're released. It is going to wait 7 days before it downloads and installs the updates. So that way, if it's a buggy update that Microsoft released, they will probably pull it and then hopefully fix it before they re-release it. But just some clarification between the paused for a long time and the disabled setting here. If you disable the Windows updates, you won't be able to use the Microsoft Store. Like the update service is not going to work. It's going to affect other applications in Windows as well. It's not just going to affect the Windows updates. And that is why, personally, I think if you don't want Windows to update automatically and you want to have more control over it, I think the paused for a long time setting is the better one to choose. So I'm going to select that and it's going to apply that to the system. And now if we go back to settings and Windows Update, you'll see the updates are paused until that date right there. So Windows updates won't install, but the other services that require Windows Update, like maybe the Microsoft Store if you use that, or any other thing in Windows that requires Windows Update for it to work, that'll still work, but the actual Windows updates, the monthly or weekly updates, those won't be installed. And if you want to toggle it, you don't have to come into Winhance and toggle it. You can just unpause it from right inside of the Windows UI here and then install the updates. So this is for those people who want to install the updates manually. They really don't want to have automatic updates. But like I said, for most people, security updates is going to be the recommended option unless Microsoft really fumbles these updates and they just keep on breaking people's systems. So you can see if I navigate back, we now have updates ready to install. And as you can see, this is a security update. Now, moving on to the other settings in Winhance, you've got the delivery optimization here, which I always set to disabled. And then you've got the other settings like get the latest updates as soon as they're available, which is the same thing that you can see here. If you go to the advanced options, you've got these receive updates for other Microsoft products, which is basically the same thing that you can see inside of the Winhance UI here. But the Winhance UI does expose some more settings and registry entries that you can set, like preventing automatic restarts, not including drivers with the updates, and update notifications, and that type of thing. So by using Winhance, you can get more control over your Windows updates if you needed that. Now let's move on to the notifications section. So in the notifications feature, you can control the notifications. You can turn all of these off, disable the notifications completely. And then you've got some additional settings here, which is related to notifications, system notifications, privacy notifications, and then Windows security notifications. So if we navigate to the settings in Windows and we navigate to system and then notifications, you'll see that it's all disabled now and you won't be getting any notifications. I prefer not to get any notifications in Windows, but if you do, then you can just enable it. That's the beauty of Winhance. You can set these settings according to your preferences. The last feature that we have in the optimizations feature at the time of this recording is the sound. You can decide if you want the startup sound to play when you boot Windows. You've got the sound ducking preference, and usually I set this to do nothing. And just to show you in Windows, that setting is found under the more sound settings and then communications. This is what that setting controls, whether it mutes all other sounds, reduces the volume, or does nothing. That is what this setting controls. And then you've got some other settings here like audio ducking, voice activation for apps, and more of those types of settings. So that's it for the optimizations section. If we move over to the customize section, this is where you can start to see stuff visually change in Windows. So you can change your theme from light mode to dark mode, and you can choose whether you want to apply the default Windows wallpaper for dark mode or light mode if you're switching to light mode. Now in the background here, you can see it's a Windows Spotlight wallpaper that I currently have active. So I'm going to change it and apply the default Windows wallpaper for dark mode. It's going to refresh Explorer, and now we'll be in dark mode with the dark mode Windows wallpaper. And then you can also toggle the transparency effects. Now the next feature we have is the taskbar feature. Here you can execute a clean taskbar command, which will remove all the pinned items from the taskbar. So if I click on apply, it's going to ask me if I also want to apply the recommended taskbar settings, which is the other settings that you see in the taskbar feature here. It's going to apply the recommended settings according to Winhance. So I'm going to leave that selected and then click on continue. And you'll see that the taskbar has now changed. It's aligned all of the icons to the left and all of the items have been unpinned. You'll have to go and repin any apps that you had pinned before to the taskbar again, like Brave, for example, and also the File Explorer. You will need to go ahead and pin that again to the taskbar if you want to have it on the taskbar. I prefer to have it on the taskbar, so if you do too, you will need to go ahead and pin it again. But it's hidden the task view button. It's also disabled the widgets. You'll see if I click on it, nothing happens, but it requires a restart for this to take effect. So once we restart, we won't be seeing that anymore. And then it's also enabled the end task in taskbar. So if you right click on an item, it'll have the end task option there for you to automatically end the task. But this only works on Windows 11. It doesn't work on Windows 10. And you won't see this setting if you're running Winhance on Windows 10. The next feature we have here is the start menu feature. Similar to the taskbar feature, you can also execute a clean start menu. So if we have a look at what the start menu looks like now, we've got all of these pinned items. We've got this LinkedIn ghost icon here, and we've got the recommended section. Now we've got a few different settings here, and if we execute the clean start menu command, it'll also prompt you if you want to apply the recommended start menu settings to disable the suggestions, recommendations, and tracking features. I'm going to leave that selected and then click on continue, and it's going to go ahead and apply all of the recommended settings for the start menu. So now if I open the start menu is completely clean and the recommended section is gone. It doesn't exist. But this only works on Pro and above versions of Windows 11. It does not work on the Home versions. On Home, the recommended section will just be disabled, but you will still see it. So from here, you can now go ahead and pin the items that you actually want on the start menu. So if I pin that to start, you'll see I now have those items pinned there. But you have some different settings here, and one of these is also to disable the Bing search results. So you'll remember from earlier in the video when I did a search for VLC, I got results on the web, and with this setting, once we restart Windows, then we won't see those online suggestions appear in the start menu anymore. Then lastly, we've got the Explorer customizations feature here, where we can enable some useful things like the classic context menu. If I enable that and we right click, we now have the classic context menu enabled, and if you want to disable it and go back to the Windows 11 style, then you can do that and use the Windows 11 style menu. I like to have the classic context menu selected, and then we have some other options like adding take ownership to the context menu and a bunch of other different settings. Like I said, I'm not going to go through every single setting in this video. I want to go through the groups and the features so you can see the type of stuff that you can do with Winhance. Now we've got a files and folders group here. If I open the File Explorer and we go to the options and we go to the View tab, you can see the files and folders settings that you have here, and you've got a navigation pane section, and you've got a whole bunch of different settings here. Now that's the same thing that you can see inside of Winhance. If you scroll down, you can see all of those items here. For example, popular settings here are to show file extensions, so you can toggle that. You can show protected operating system files, or you can disable it to hide it. You can show hidden files and folders. And these are all settings that I had to go and toggle manually every time on a new install of Windows by going into these folder options settings here and then toggling each setting here inside of the folder options. If you go over to the General tab, you'll see that you have an option to open File Explorer to Home or this PC, and you have the same thing in the General section in Winhance. You can open it to this PC, and you've basically got the same settings in Winhance here that you have inside of Windows in the folder options. But it's not just the Windows settings, you also have some other options, like, for example, you can enable the Windows Photo Viewer if you want to use that. You can show the home folder or gallery in the navigation pane. So if I open the File Explorer, you usually have the Home and Gallery tab here. If I go ahead and toggle that off, you'll see they disappeared from the navigation pane. I personally don't ever use that, but if you do, then you can just keep it enabled. And then we have some other options here. So like I said before, the customize feature is mostly for visual changes that you can see as you're using Windows, whereas the optimize feature is more for background related tasks or stuff that you can't necessarily see change inside of Windows. So now that we've gotten to the end of the features, before we move on to the advanced tools, the whole point of Winhance is to save you time when reinstalling Windows or setting up Windows on a new computer and eliminating repetitive tasks of going to set every single setting every single time. So we have a few ways of automating this. With Winhance, you can save a config, which saves all of the settings inside of Winhance with the current states that they are in. So if you have dark mode selected, it's going to save a config with the choose your mode setting as dark mode. And when you apply the config, it'll always apply dark mode to Windows as well. Now, Winhance does Windows version filtering, meaning if you run it on Windows 11, you're going to see only settings related to Windows 11. If you run it on Windows 10, you're going to see only settings related to Windows 10. But you have some control over it. You've got a filter icon here. And if I click on the filter icon, you'll see that the filter is on by default, and it shows you only the compatible settings with your Windows version. If you toggle the filter off, then it shows you all of the settings, Windows 10 and Windows 11. And this is useful for when you want to export cross-version settings. So you want one config file that contains settings for both Windows 10 and Windows 11. So you'll want to use this when you create a Winhance config or an autounattend.xml file, which we'll get to later, that need to work across different versions of Windows, or if you just need to toggle a setting that is related to another version of Windows for some reason, and you want to have it exposed in the Winhance UI. So when you go and import this config after you've created it, that's now created for both Windows 10 and Windows 11, it's just going to apply the settings that are applicable to your Windows version. So it'll just apply the Windows 11 settings if you're running it on Windows 11. If you want to toggle a Windows 10 setting, then you can just toggle the version filter and physically toggle that switch inside of Winhance. So I'm going to toggle the filter so you can see what happens. If the filter is off, like it is now, you'll see settings in Winhance that apply to the other Windows version. So I'm running it on Windows 11 right now, but I'm now seeing settings that apply to Windows 10 as well. So like I explained, this is useful for when you want to create a global config that's going to work on a Windows 10 and Windows 11 system. So in this demo, I didn't toggle every single setting to my desired state in Winhance. But that is basically what you would do if you wanted to create a config for yourself. You would make sure that all of the toggles are toggled to their desired states in Winhance. And just as a side note, when it comes to these clean taskbar commands and the clean start menu command that we have, those are included by default, but during the import process, you'll have an option if you want to apply it or not. So before exporting a config file, make sure that all of these settings in the customize and optimize features are set to the desired state that you want to have them in. And then for the software and apps, here you also need to select the items that you want to have removed in the Windows Apps section. So for example, let's select all of the items that's not installed, because that's basically what I always want to remove on my computer. And then in the external software section, you can also select the items that you want to have installed when you do a reinstall of Windows. So for example, I'm just going to choose Brave, 7-zip, maybe Start All Back and Notepad++. Maybe just those 4 items just for this example. And then once you've made all of these selections, you can see it's still selected as we navigate through the features. If we now click on the Save Configuration button, it's going to open a dialog and ask you where you want to save your config. For this video, I'm just going to save it on the desktop. You can also rename it. You can call it whatever you want. Winhance cool config. Let's go with that. Click on Save. And now the config file is going to be saved to the directory. In our case, it's the desktop. Now, if we uncheck all of this and toggle settings on, let's just use the transparency effects as an example and the dark mode and light mode as an example. Let's just change that in Winhance after exporting our config file. Remember, this is just as an example. If I now go and click on the import config, you'll have 2 options. You can either import your own config file, or you can import the recommended config file, and we'll get to this one in a moment. Let's start with the config file we just created. So I'm going to choose import my own config file. I'm going to select my Winhance cool config and then just click on open. Now you'll have the option of choosing what you want to have applied and what you don't want to have applied. So if we go through these sections, in the Windows Apps section, you'll have the option to process the app removals now during the config import process, or you can only select the checkboxes and you'll process them manually, meaning you'll click on the button to remove them. I'm going to select that for now. Then for the external apps, you can process the app installations now automatically, or you can process it manually. I'm just going to select the manually process option for now. Then you can choose the different features inside of the optimization settings that you want to have applied. So let's say that you don't want to have the Windows Update settings applied when you import this config, then you can just uncheck it. When it gets to the customization settings, in the Windows theme, you have the option of applying the default wallpaper for the selected theme. So in our case, it's going to be the dark theme because that's what we had selected when we exported our config. And then when it gets to the taskbar and start menu items, you can apply the clean taskbar and apply the clean start menu as part of the config import process. So I'm going to import the config file that we just created now, but I'm not going to process the app removals. I'm going to get to that in a bit. So I'll click on OK. You'll see this message that says, sit back, relax, and watch while Winhance enhances Windows with your desired settings. It's going to go through and apply the sections that you selected. And now you can see we've got the dark mode applied again with the dark wallpaper, and the transparency effects have been turned off, and we've got dark mode back inside of Winhance. So that's how you can export your own config and then import that config into Winhance. But I've also added another option like you saw earlier. If we click on the import config button, you can now import the recommended config, which loads Winhance's recommended config file. So if I select that option, you'll see there's 48 items that's selected in the Windows Apps section. Now you can't see what's selected on this screen. If you want to see what's selected and you don't want to have it removed automatically, then you can select the second option, so it processes it manually. The same with the external apps. For most people, they'll probably select the manually process option so they can review the apps in the Windows Apps section, and the external apps section that'll be removed and installed. But what I want to demonstrate to you here is that in just a few clicks, you can take Windows 11 or Windows 10 from the bloated mess that it is and apply either Winhance's recommended settings or your desired settings in just a few clicks. So if I click on OK, you can confirm the removal of the apps. So you can also see on this screen the apps that will be removed. And if you want to continue, I'm going to continue. So I'll click on yes. And once again, you'll see the overlay again, where you can just sit back, relax, and watch while Winhance enhances Windows with your desired settings. So it's going to process the app removals. It's then going to go and apply the optimizations. And after that, it's going to apply the customizations. And then at the very end, it's going to close the overlay and it'll start with the external apps that you had selected. It'll start with that installation automatically if you had the option selected to have it automatically installed. If you had the option selected that you'll process it manually, then you'll have to click on the button yourself. So our config has been applied successfully. If I click on OK, you can see it's starting to install Brave. Now I'm going to cancel this because we've already installed Brave. But if we go back to the software and apps section, to the external software, you can see that we have the items selected. So in the recommended config file that I just imported, these are some of the recommended apps that I usually use. We've got Brave, 7-Zip, Milesoft Shell, Start All Back, Notepad++. We've got Only Office Desktop Editors, Sumatra PDF, File Converter, Steam for gaming, Greenshot for screenshots, Faststone Image Viewer. We got OBS Studio, Media Player Classic, and then Unigate UI, which is a very good software manager. And I recommend that you guys use Unigate UI for software management purposes. But I think you get the idea of how this works and how it's supposed to work, and my vision for the Winhance app. So what I demonstrated up until now is basically how you can use Winhance manually to toggle settings. And then also if you want to create a config file, or you already have a config file and you want to have your desired settings applied via Winhance, which will take less than a minute, and you've got a clean Windows install, then you can do that. But Winhance also has some other awesome features. So if we go to the advanced tools, we've now got WIMUtil and the ability to create an auto-unattended XML file. So let's start with creating the auto-unattended XML, because that's actually going to lead us into the WIMUtil. So if I click on that, you can see that you can generate an auto-unattended XML file to add to a Windows ISO to customize Windows during the installation based on your selections in Winhance. How this works: the apps that you selected on the Windows app screen will be automatically uninstalled, and the settings in the optimize and customize screens will be added according to their current state in Winhance. So it basically works the same way the config does. Depending on what selections you have and what items you've checked, that's going to be processed. Now, the external apps are not part of the autounattend.xml file, at least not on this version of Winhance. But if you're sure your selections are correct, you can continue. If not, you can hit cancel, review your app settings and selections, and then come back. So I'm sure that I want to continue with these settings because remember, I just imported the recommended Winhance config. So I'm pretty sure that the settings that I have there will be generally okay. So I'm going to select continue. You'll be prompted to save it to a location. We'll just choose the desktop again. So I'll click save, and now you'll see that the autounattend.xml file has been created. It's been saved to this location. So now we can either use WIMUtil to add this to our Windows ISO, which is what we're going to do next, or you can manually copy it to the root of your Windows installation media, and then you can install Windows using the modified media. Then you're prompted if you want to open WIMUtil to create the ISO, or if you want to do it later. Now we're going to use WIMUtil to create the ISO, and I honestly recommend you to always use the Windows installation media utility to create your ISO files, because you have the option of adding the XML file directly here. You can extract and add the current system drivers to the ISO file, and overall, if all goes well, you'll just have a better experience installing Windows this way. So we've got our autounattend.xml file on the desktop here, and it doesn't matter what icon the autounattended.xml file has. I've seen a lot of questions from people asking that why does mine display as Microsoft Edge and why does the other guys display as a notepad file? It doesn't matter as what it's displayed. As long as it's autounattend.xml, it'll work. So the very first thing you'll need to do is select a Windows ISO file. Now you've got links here to download Windows 10 or Windows 11, and this is from the official Windows website. So you can either download Windows 10 or Windows 11 from the official Microsoft website, and you'll have to go through the process of downloading the ISO file. I've got plenty of videos on this channel showing you how to download these ISO files. I'm also not going to download the ISO file in this video because I've already got the latest Windows 11 25H2 ISO file. So the way this works is you can't move on to the other steps before step 1 is completed, obviously. So to start, you'll have to select your Windows ISO. And by the way, only official Microsoft ISOs are supported. I don't support any other custom ISOs made by other developers. This is designed to work with the official Windows 10 and Windows 11 ISO files. So you will select your ISO and then click on Open. And next, you'll then see the ISO file path that you selected here. Then you can select a working directory. There is a default path that we use, but I'm going to select folder and then click on the desktop so I can use the desktop as my working directory. And if you've already extracted the ISO contents previously of an ISO file, then you can select this checkbox here, then select the folder, and you won't have to extract the ISO file's contents because it's been extracted already. But in our case, we haven't extracted it yet. So we've now selected our ISO file and we've selected a working directory. Now we can start extraction. So I'm going to click on that. It'll then begin extracting the ISO and you can see the progress down here. So we'll just wait a moment for this to complete because it can take quite a while depending on the size of the Windows ISO file. Okay, so once the ISO extraction has been completed, then you can proceed to the next step. So we'll click on OK, and then we'll continue. So after the ISO extraction has completed, in step 1, you'll have an optional card where you can convert the image file format. So currently we have a WIM file, but you can convert that to ESD if you wanted to. If it was an ESD file, you would have been able to convert it to a WIM file. But for most people, you don't need to worry about this. This was a feature that was requested by someone that I added to the Windows installation media utility. So that's why I added it here. I'm not going to do any conversion. I'm just going to keep it as it is and then move on to the next step. So the next two steps are optional. Firstly, you can add an XML file, an autounattend.xml file. Now, if you don't know what this is, you can generate an XML file using the Schneegen's XML unattend generator. He's also got a bunch of links where you can see what answer files are. Basically, it's a feature by Microsoft that allows you to perform unattended installations of Windows 10 and Windows 11. So it's basically like automating stuff during the Windows installation process. Now, if you've been following my channel for a while or you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I have a project called Unattended Winstall, which is a personalized, pre-configured auto-unattend XML file. So if we go back to the Windows Media Utility, you need to select one of the following options. So you can either generate and add a Winhance XML directly inside of the WIMUtil. So previously we just created the XML file, and I can just go and select this XML file and now add it to the Windows ISO working directory. That's going to be, in this case, it's going to be the same as generating and adding the Winhance XML. But the select XML file option does exist if you've maybe created an auto-unattend XML file yourself, or with the Schneegen's unattended generator or other similar services. This is basically if you want to select your own XML file. You also have the option of downloading and adding the latest unattended Winstall XML file, and this obviously requires internet, and then you can generate and add an Winhance XML directly inside of WIMUtil. So I'm just going to show you what that looks like. I'm just going to click on generate. You'll see the same screen that we saw previously when we generated the auto-unattend XML file. And using WIMUtil, you can click yes again, and it's then going to generate the same file, but automatically add it to the installation media. So you wouldn't have to choose a location to save it. It's just going to save it directly in the working directory where we're busy creating this custom ISO file. So once again, you can only select one of these options. You can't combine different autounattend.xml files from different services. You can only upload one XML file, one pre-configured XML file. So for example, you can't generate one with Schneegans and generate one with Winhance and think those two are just magically going to collide and all of the settings will be in one file. That's just not how it works. You select one of the following options and then add that XML file to the Windows installation media. So now we've completed step 1 and step 2. Let's move on to the drivers. So you can extract and add the drivers from this current operating system. And this is recommended because it means that when you reinstall Windows, you'll have all of the drivers automatically that you had on the system before formatting and reinstalling Windows. And then you can also add other drivers. So this is if you have a folder that contains drivers that you want to add to the installation media, then you can select and add that folder. These two options work together. So if you extract and add the drivers from the current OS, and you then go and select other drivers that you might have in another directory, they'll just be added to the drivers that have already been extracted. So you'll have both of these options. One is not going to override the other. It'll just add the drivers to any of the existing drivers that's been added to the Windows installation media. So like I said, this can take quite a while depending on the amount of drivers, but you can see that it is still busy and it is loading, and just now it finished extracting and adding the drivers from the current operating systems. So if I open the working directory here and we go to the sources folder, they're basically put in these folders here. So in the OEM folder, you'll have these $signs and the drivers are inside of that directory. You've also got a setup script, which will automatically install them. And this is the way that Windows wants you to do it, by putting these $signs like that. It just tells Windows in which directory to put those drivers. So now that we've done that, we can move on to the final step, which is creating the new ISO. Now, if you already have the Windows ADK installed, which contains OS CD image, which is required to create this ISO file, then you won't see this option. But most people are going to see that you need to download and install OS CD image. And this obviously also requires internet. And the download time is going to depend on your internet connection speed. So we have to do it. I'm going to click on download. And this is going to download the official Windows ADK. It's not being downloaded from some third-party site. It's being downloaded from the actual Windows ADK website. It's being extracted and then installed on the system. And then once that's done, it's going to give us the ability to select the location where we want to save our new ISO file, and then we'll create that ISO. And when we're done with that, we're going to install it on this computer, and I'll show you how this whole thing works. So it took a minute or two, but now we have the Windows ADK deployment tools installed and OSCD image is now available. So we'll click on OK. Then we need to select a location where we want to save our ISO. So we've got Winhance Windows that we're going to save it as. And I'm just going to save it to the desktop once again. Click on Save and then click on Create ISO. And it'll then start creating the custom ISO that contains our XML file and our drivers using the Windows ADK and OSCD image, and then we'll be able to boot from that ISO and install Windows. So once again, this process can also take quite a while because adding the drivers and stuff to the ISO can increase the size of it significantly. And we'll compare the sizes of the official Windows ISO file with the newly created custom ISO just to see how much bigger the custom ISO is. And it only took a few minutes, and now the Windows installation ISO has been created successfully. And you'll be prompted if you want to open the folder containing the ISO file. I'll click on yes, just to open that folder, and there we've got it. So if I maximize this and we compare the sizes, the Windows 11 25H2 ISO is around 7.5 gigs. And the new Winhance Windows ISO is 9.5. So it's about 2 gigabytes of increase, which is not too massive. Now you can use this ISO file to install Windows in a virtual machine if you want to test it out in a virtual machine. Or you can create a bootable USB flash drive if you want to install it on physical hardware, which is exactly what I'm going to do in this video. And to do that, I recommend that you use a software called Ventoy. So I always do a search for Ventoy GitHub on Google, and then I download Ventoy from the GitHub releases section here on the right. And then we'll just download the Ventoy Windows zip file, extract it to the desktop or save it to the desktop so we can get it from there. But you can also use Rufus if you want to create your Windows installation media with Rufus. And if you go to the unattended Winstall GitHub page, on the README file here, I've got detailed instructions on how to use the autounattend.xml files and how you can create bootable Windows installation media. Like I said, using the WIMUtil is highly preferred, but you also have the old methods here where I have video tutorials showing you how to create it using Rufus, for example, and then also how to use it to create a bootable USB flash drive. So you can get detailed instructions on the unattended Winstall page if you needed that, but I'm going to extract these Ventoy files. Then I'm just going to open the folder and then click on Ventoy to disk. Then you'll need to select the USB flash disk that you want to use. For me, it's going to be the USB SanDisk, and you can see that I've already got Ventoy on here, but I'm going to install it again. So if I click on install, it'll tell you that the data on this drive will be lost. So everything will be deleted. So make sure that you use a dedicated USB for this, which doesn't contain any of your personal files or anything, because the data will be lost, and you'll have to confirm that it can format the USB drive so you can use it for the Windows install. And you can see Ventoy has now been installed on that device. So I've got the USB flash drive with Ventoy open here, and I'm going to copy the Winhance Windows ISO file onto that so we can boot from it. But I'm also just going to copy the normal Windows ISO file, the Windows 1125H2 ISO file, so that I have both of them in case I need to do a clean install again, which I will probably need to do for recording videos. And this is obviously going to take some time as well. So while that's busy copying, I'm just going to minimize and close all of that, and we can go back to Winhance. So we can just finish up with the demo of it. So now that we're done with Winhance, if you go and close Winhance for the first time, you'll see a nice message asking that if you found this tool helpful, that you can please consider making a small donation to support development. The support really helps and it keeps this project going. So if you click on yes, it's going to open your browser and it's going to take you to my Ko-Fi page. And if you scroll down on this page, you'll see that a lot of people have already supported the application. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank every single one of you who supported the project and supported me. I am a solo developer working on Winhance, and that's the way I prefer it, because that way I also learn a lot more about development. But with that being said, if you find Winhance useful, please consider donating to support development so I can keep the project going, because your support and these donations help to keep it completely free and open source. Thank you to every single one once again, and let's get back to the video. I also understand that there are some people who just can't afford to donate money to a developer like me, and that's completely fine. In that case, you can still support the project by sharing this video, by making other people aware of Winhance, by starring the project on GitHub, just getting the word out to your friends and other people who might find Winhance useful. So thanks once again for everyone's support. I really appreciate it, and it helps me create the best possible product that I can possibly create. Okay, so now that I've got the Winhance Windows ISO file copied over to the Ventoy disk, I'm going to shut down this computer and we're going to perform a clean installation of Windows using the Winhance Windows ISO file, and it'll have all of our settings already applied via the autounattend.xml file. Okay, so I'm just booting up the computer now, and I'm going to press F12 to get to the boot menu. So I'm still on the same computer that I was just on while recording this video. I'm just recording from a different computer via an HDMI capture card. So to install Windows, we want to boot from our UEFI USB, which has Ventoy installed. So I'm going to select that and press enter. And now we have the two options, which are the two ISO files that I copied to the drive. So we have the normal Windows 11 25H2 ISO, and then we've got the Winhance Windows. So we want to install the Winhance Windows. So I'm going to select that and press enter, and then press enter to boot in normal mode, and then just press spacebar when it prompts me to press any key to boot from that disk. So right now it's booting from the Winhance Windows ISO file, and it's going to boot directly into the Windows setup. Now from here it's a normal Windows installation because this is still an official Windows ISO file. We just added our own autounattend.xml file to it, and we added system drivers to it following Microsoft's documentation. So I'm going to select my time and currency format, and I'm in South Africa. So that's what I'm going to select. Then click on next. I'll leave the keyboard settings on US and click on next again. It's going to go through the setup process, and then we'll get the prompt to enter a product key. I'm just going to click on I don't have a product key, so we can select our Windows version, and I'm going to be installing Windows 11 Pro. Now, just as a side note, if you're installing this on a laptop and you don't see these screens, that is because Microsoft basically forces the OEM key that is on a laptop that's saved in the motherboard UEFI. They basically force you to install that version of Windows. Now, there are some ways around that by using an autounattend.xml file, but the one that we're creating now does not contain a predefined Windows license key. It has no license key, which gives you the ability to select your Windows edition like Pro or Home, and then also you have to provide your own license key to activate Windows, which is the way that Microsoft wants things to be done. So I'm going to select Windows 11 Pro and then select next. It's going to do the last checks on the computer. Then we'll get to selecting the disk. Now we've got two disks here. Disk 1 is the Ventoy USB disk, so we're not going to be touching that. I'm going to be selecting disk 0, and then I'll delete all of the partitions on disk 0. So this is going to delete all of the data on that drive, but this is a test SSD that I'm using. There's nothing important on there. If you're doing this, then make sure you have all of your important files backed up so that when you delete the partitions on that drive, you're not losing any important information. So now that all of the partitions are deleted, I'm going to select disk 0 and click on next, and then it's going to start installing Windows 11 with the Winhance Windows ISO. Okay, so Windows is installed, and looking at the recording time, it took about 15 minutes, give or take, to get to this point. So you'll have to choose your country or region, as always, then select your keyboard layout, and if you want to add another keyboard layout or not. Then after that, you'll be prompted to enter your username. So I'm just going to enter memory here. Just click on next again, and that user account will now be created, and we'll load into Windows in just a moment. Now we've just loaded into the user account for the first time, and immediately you can see that dark mode has been enabled. As according to our settings, there's absolutely no pinned apps on the start menu, and also no recommended items. If I click on all apps, only the apps that I had selected to be installed is installed in the form of the calculator, Notepad, Paint, and then the snipping tool and terminal. So all of the other applications that I didn't want to have installed have been removed, and I'm only left with the apps that I actually want to use on Windows 11. Now, if we go into the settings and we just have a look through the settings, I'm just going to cancel the gigabyte utilities prompt there for now and just go through the settings with you. If we have a look at some of these settings, like the notifications, you can see they've all been disabled, just like we had in our Winhance settings. And going through some of these other options like privacy and security, general, all of these toggles have been disabled, and you can see as I'm going through these sections, all of them have been disabled to disable telemetry and all of these feedback that's being sent to Microsoft so that it's not sent to them by default. Again, same with the Windows updates. It's only going to install security updates in this version of the file that I selected, and all of the other toggles have been disabled. Now, something important I'll mention, if you go back to system and then notifications, you'll see these messages that says some of these settings are managed by your organization, and that just means it's a group policy registry key that was created, and that just means that it's certain settings that are being enforced by those registry keys onto the system. So it's just a way that Microsoft uses to enforce certain settings on the Windows operating system. So when it's set that way, then it won't change via a Windows update, or you're not able to toggle it automatically from inside of the UI here. Now, if I close these settings, normally the Windows wallpaper is going to default to the dark mode or light mode wallpaper, depending on the Windows version. In this case, the Windows Spotlight wallpaper is still enabled, but it is actually supposed to be the dark mode Windows wallpaper in this case. But the wallpaper change just might have not taken effect yet, or wasn't applied during this installation. Now, some other things I want to take a look at is if I just do a search for view the advanced system settings and I open the performance settings, you can see that it is set to custom and that it only has the settings that I selected in Winhance when we created the XML file. So if I go ahead and exit out of that and we have a look at the file explorer and some of the settings inside of there, if we open the folder options, you can see it's automatically set to open to this PC. All of these checkboxes have been unchecked, and if we go to the View tab, certain settings like Show Hidden Files, Folders, and Drives is automatically checked, and that's shown by default. And this is just the recommended File Explorer settings that I use. If we look at the navigation pane, the settings don't exist in Windows, but you can see on the left here that the Home and the Gallery have been unpinned, and they're no longer there. So this is just to show you that the settings that you select in Winhance does make it into the autounattend.xml file. Now, if I right click, you can also see that the classic context menu is enabled, and that's also something that I selected in Winhance when we created the XML file. But something I want to have a look at is if we right click on the start button and we then go to the device manager to look at the drivers, you can see all of the drivers have been installed for the system and there's nothing that's missing. Now, the drivers that were exported with WIMUtil, you can find that under local disk C and then Windows, and then you'll have a folder called drivers. So if you open that, that's going to be all the drivers that you exported with WIMUtil, and that should automatically get installed while you're installing Windows. If for some reason you get to Device Manager and the drivers were not installed, then you can just find the drivers that weren't installed. Like, let's just take the network adapter, for example. If you then right click on it and you go to Update Driver or Install Driver, then you can just click Browse My Computer for Drivers, click on Browse, and then you can navigate to that folder that I just mentioned. So it's going to be on local disk C, then Windows, and then you'll have the drivers folder there. So let me just navigate to that. There we've got the drivers folder. So if I select that and we leave this checked to include subfolders, and you then click on Next, it'll find the correct driver from that folder, and then it'll install it on your system. In this case, the driver is already installed, so it's not going to install anything else, and you can see that all of the drivers have been installed for this computer. Now, something you might have noticed by now is that there is an option here to install Winhance, and it's a shortcut on the desktop. Now, I'm going to run this, and you'll see that it's going to download the Winhance installer from GitHub, and then automatically run that installer so we can get Winhance installed. Now, this is default. It's always going to be like this if you use the Winhance XML file to install Windows. And this is so you can toggle settings once again, and also so you can install software that's needed. So in my case, I don't have a browser at the moment. I uninstalled Microsoft Edge during the Windows installation, so I literally have no browser or anything. Now, if you're tech savvy, you can just use Winget or the command line to install apps. You don't need to use Winhance, but this is for most users to provide them once again with a user interface where they can install apps on this fresh install of Windows. So we're going to launch Winhance for the first time on this new fresh install of Windows, and it's going to go through the same checks, meaning it's going to create a system restore point, and then it's also going to create a registry backup, just so we have a safety net or a point to go back to before the Winhance installation. So like I said before, this first run might take a little bit longer than usual, but it is because those tasks are happening in the background. When it launches, you'll get the same message I showed before, explaining that all of this has been enabled. So we'll just click on OK. And since our issue is that we need to install software, let's go over to the external software section. And I'm just going to select Brave and then install that. And then it should go ahead and download Brave via Widgets, and then once it's downloaded, it's going to start the installation. And there we see the Brave icon on the desktop. So now we've got access to a browser. Now, one thing you can do here is you can import a config file. So you can either import your own config or the recommended Winhance config. I'm just going to select the recommended one for now. And then you can select only the external apps and then choose the option to select the checkboxes only. And then you can also uncheck all of these items. So the only thing that will happen now is it's going to select the recommended 14 items in the external app section. So if I click on OK, it's going to apply the config. But the only thing it did now was select the recommended software. So you can see that the recommended items are now selected. For example, Brave is selected. That is one of the recommended items. And then I've got 7-zip, start all back, now soft shell. I went through this earlier, but this is basically just a quick way to get some of the recommended items that I recommend installed on your system. But you can do the same thing by creating your own config file. And then once you've reinstalled Windows this way, you can just import your config file and then select the external apps section, select all of these items, and then install all of them. I'm not going to install all of them in this video for the sake of time, but yeah, then you can go ahead and use Winhance to toggle any settings. Maybe you're not happy with the setting that you chose. Then you can just go through these settings again or navigate to the setting that you want to change. Like maybe, for example, you wanted to change your user account control level. Then you can do that in the Winhance UI here. So that concludes this demo of Winhance. I really hope you find the app and the video useful. If you happen to use it and you find any bugs or you just have a feature request, please go onto the Winhance GitHub page and then create an issue about it, and I'll see what I can do. The app is still in development, so there are going to be bugs, and I appreciate every single one of you who bring them to my attention so I can make the app even better. I'm also going to be creating more videos about Winhance and unattended install, which is one of my other projects. And I'll link those videos all up here if you want to check those out. But as always, before I end the video, I just want to give a special shout out to all of my YouTube members. Thanks so much for your support. I really appreciate it. And I'll talk to all of you guys soon.